two areas that I think are the highest priority. One is customer data. If you don't know who your customers are, if you don't have an ability to make offerings to them, you're not going to be very successful in growing your business.
Olá, amigos da plataforma Gestão do Amanhã, um prazer estar aqui com vocês agora. Tenho a honra de entrevistar o Thomas Davenport. Thomas Davenport é um estudioso da tecnologia, de novos conhecimentos, foi pioneiro em várias áreas da gestão, gestão do conhecimento, reengenharia, competição analítica, sempre um inovador no pensamento gerencial, sempre à frente do seu tempo. Grande amigo nosso, né? Eu já trabalhei vários anos com ele, e vai ser um prazer entrevistá-lo. Então, com vocês aqui, o Tom Davenport. You, several years ago, you wrote a book called Competição Analytics, and, it was just another book at the time, and it was a good book, well known. But now, all we think is about analytics and data. So tell us about how you saw the change, and what did you see back then, and what do you see now?
Sure. Well, I'd worked with analytics. It was called, statistics. Then in a lot in graduate school, I did a lot of statistical, but I was running a research program at Babson with a bunch of companies in it on knowledge management. And I realized one day that, there was this important source of knowledge, which is knowledge derived from data, analyzing data and making sense of it. And so I tried for several years to get these big companies interested in that. And for the most part, they weren't interested. Some people are interested in kind of textual knowledge. Some people like numbers. You don't find that many people who cross that gap. But I had a couple of sponsors, this company SAS, a big statistical software company, and Intel, and they said, yeah, we're interested. Why don't you go off and do a special study of some of our customers who were using business intelligence, as it was called at the time. I remember talking to the head of marketing for SAS, and he said, well, I don't know if you should call it analytics. Nobody knows that term. And competing on analytics, which was the name of the Harvard Business Review article, he said, I don't know, you should probably call it something else. That'll never catch on. So it was as always, there was some luck to it, but it came out, and at the same time, you had this kind of Moneyball thing happening in baseball in the U.S., and the amount of data was exploding, and fortunately for a while, it was really the only thing that talked about the sort of strategic and business side implications of all of this data and how to make sense of it. So it's a fortunate bit of timing there.
And how about the traditional companies, Tom? Mir, do you think they're lagging behind the new startups and the technology companies on data management and what they can do about it?
A lot of them are, because they don't have senior managers who really care all that much about this issue, and they let data kind of proliferate in an unmanaged way around the organization. So you have, but there are certainly some established companies that do it well. Procter & Gamble has kind of always cared about this, and they're quite good at it. As I mentioned, Marriott's been around for a long time, and they were the first to really use data for revenue management and pricing analytics, and they're still the best in the industry at it. There's an insurance company called Progressive that is very good at this and has been doing it for a long time. But now you have some really large organizations like Chase Bank. They said they spend $5 billion a year on analytics and AI R&D. So really trying to be quite aggressive about that. And I think the energy has certainly moved over time from just focusing on analytics to saying, okay, well, we're really interested in big data, the large volume, less structured forms of data. And now everybody's interested in AI.
And how do you see the evolution of the big techs in the past years, and how the traditional companies can actually prepare and compete and gain time before they get eaten alive?
Yeah, well, I think Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Chase, JP Morgan Chase, says, we need to be just as good as Google at managing data. That's one of the reasons why they're spending so much money to try to get better at this. And I think, I think you talked about this in some of your writing, that they want you as their supplier to be just as easy and just as digital to deal with as Amazon and Google and so on. So everybody has to meet those very high expectations. Now with COVID, it incorporates new ways of working remotely and so on. Companies, I think, have in many cases even accelerated what they're doing, even though there's not as much money around as there was. They see this as incredibly important for them to operate successfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about digital transformation, you wrote recently a beautiful article talking about how digital transformation comes down to talent in 4 areas: technology, data, processes, and organizational change. So, and one of the areas you mentioned here about the data is that a lot of companies that you see, that you work with, and that you see, their data management is very weak. So does that prevent companies to make the transformation, Tom?
It does in many cases. I think, data is the fuel of this whole engine that if you don't have your data, of reasonably high quality and it's integrated effectively across the organization, now I think more and more organizations want a better view of what's happening externally. Peter Drucker, I know you had worked with some, used to say, well, the only real problem with information is it's way too internal in companies, and companies don't have any sense of what's happening with people who aren't their customers and what's happening with suppliers who aren't their suppliers and so on. So, but now I think more and more companies are saying we need external data as well, which has opened up a whole new frontier for thinking about data and the management of it.
So, talking about data, which data, if you had to put in order, which are the priorities? Customer data or market data? What is your, how do you see data as a priority? Which ones are?
Well, if you want to make money with your data, I think there are really 2 areas that I think are the highest priority. One is customer data. If you don't know who your customers are, if you don't have an ability to make offerings to them, you're not going to be very successful in growing your business. And then kind of a related area, I often say if your real goal is to make money with data and analytics, pricing data, very critical and relatively easy to address as different areas of data go. You know what people have paid for your product in the past, so you do some analysis and you do some interventions and you say, well, let's raise the price of that. Customers don't seem terribly sensitive. Let's raise the price by 10% and see what happens. And in almost every case, the company makes more money.
Tom, in an environment of so much information and generation of knowledge, how do you make an adequate strategy to take advantage of the insights generated by all this knowledge that's being produced? Because there's so much knowledge produced now. So how can companies manage that to get insights on that?
Yeah, well, I've always argued that the sort of key behavior or aspect of organizations that you need to really focus on to do that is decisions and decision making. but for years I would ask audiences, you always had such big audiences, it was hard to ask them questions, but you'd say, how many of you know what your top 10 most important decisions are? Hardly anybody ended up raising their hand. And then if you knew what your decisions were, you could say, well, what information do we have to support those decisions? Otherwise, I think you end up not really tying the information and data and analytics that you have to what you really need. I mean, the key purpose of all of this data and analysis is to make better decisions about operational things like, pricing and marketing and so on. Sometimes better strategic decisions. Should we acquire a competitor? Should we enter a new market?
How about skills, management skills, managers' skills? Are schools preparing managers for today's age, or is there a gap? Or business schools are thinking something different than what the skills are needed today? And if you had your own school, your management, you have the Tom Davenport School of Business, what would you do?
Well, I don't think in general business schools are doing a great job. Certainly some do better than others, but take Harvard Business School, which you and I both know. And a lot of other schools, I think, don't have any required courses in technology and data and information and so on. I think that's a big shortcoming. And now we have more and more specialized programs, master's degrees in analytics and data science and so on. And those are good, but, in keeping with your question a few moments ago, if this is a capability that every business needs to have, then every business student needs to have those capabilities and that understanding.
And managers too, right? I mean, even
Absolutely.
managers that we're not educated in this area, I think that they need to speed up on learning digital tools, artificial intelligence, algorithms. In general, I think the knowledge for that is quite low, and it's pretty dangerous if they don't have the knowledge, how they'll be able to make the transformation.
I agree. I've seen some survey data suggesting that most managers above a certain age feel that they do need to have those capabilities, but they're not sure they have enough knowledge and skill to master them, which I think is false. I think this is not rocket science. Anybody can learn what they need to learn to be an effective manager in the information age.
Bom, amigos da plataforma Gestão da Manhã, agradeço vocês terem assistido aqui, espero que tenham gostado dos insights gerados pelo Tom, né? E nos vemos na próxima, que teremos com muitas novidades, muitas entrevistas maravilhosas.